I was called dead weight at a family dinner by my husband. Days later, I left everything behind and built my own empire. At Thanksgiving dinner, amidst the laughter of my children and grandchildren, my husband looked into my eyes and said I was dead weight. In front of everyone. The sentence fell like a verdict, but it was also the snap that was missing. Without raising my voice, without causing a scene, I got up from the table. And I was never the same again. This story begins with pain, silence, and devaluation. But along the way I found courage, a reunion with myself, and something I never imagined I would have, freedom. Today, I have built something that goes far beyond what I once dreamed. Thank you for being here. Follow my story to the end and tell me in the comments which city you are watching from. I want to know how far my voice has reached. The table was set to perfection as always. I had spent the entire day preparing every dish, choosing the right china, ensuring everyone was comfortable. The house smelled of cinnamon, roast turkey, and memories that no one seemed to notice. My grandchildren laughed among themselves. My children chatted animatedly with their spouses. I was a ghost among them, serving, cleaning, smiling. No one asked me how I was. No one noticed if I sat down or remained standing. Robert raised his glass and made a toast. He did not mention my name. Brenda commented on the new furniture in her living room. Ryan complained about the traffic. Logan just observed, silent as always. My gestures were invisible. My presence was ignored as part of the scenery. Every time I passed a plate, I forced a smile. But inside it was as if something was breaking in slow motion. And no one saw the shards. I finally sat down, feeling the weight of the silence surround me. I tried to enter the conversation. I said something about the dinner, about my mother's recipes. No response. Brenda just cast a look of boredom. Ryan checked his cell phone and Robert rolled his eyes. The words dissolved in the air, like smoke. I felt my face burn with shame, but I kept smiling. Because that was what I did. I always did. And perhaps they thought I didn't know how to be anything else anymore. I stood up slowly, with a plate of still warm pumpkin pie in my hands. I stood there for a few seconds looking at each of them. I still expected a look, a gesture, any crumb of attention. But everyone was too busy with their own voices. Even Logan looked away. The kitchen in the background seemed more welcoming than those people who carried my blood. I took a deep breath. Does anyone still want pumpkin pie? I asked, but no one answered. The silence that followed was like a dull punch to the chest. And then Robert, with his clear and mocking voice, said, "The truth is that you have become dead weight." The table exploded in laughter. Brenda laughed loudly, Ryan too. Even the grandchildren seemed to laugh without really understanding why. Only Logan remained serious, uncomfortable, but said nothing. I froze. Not because of the words, but because of the echo of them, as if they were the summary of an entire erased life. A label sewn onto me without me having a chance to remove it. My hands were motionless on the table, and the fork I was holding trembled discreetly. But I did not cry. I had already cried enough tears in nightly silences, in empty kitchens, in locked bathrooms. That was not new, just clearer. Robert looked at me as if he had made a great revelation, as if he expected my reaction. But I did not give him that satisfaction. I remained there, whole on the outside, even though inside I was crumbling into pieces. They went back to talking as if nothing had been said. Every second there was like suffocating in an airless room. I found myself looking at my plate, at the crumbs of something that no longer nourished me either. It was as if suddenly everything became clear. They never saw me. They never listened to me. I was always the backdrop of the party, the invisible support. And now, even that didn't matter anymore. Every laugh around the table was a shovel of dirt thrown on top of me. And I knew I couldn't stay there waiting to die in silence anymore. I stood up slowly without saying a word. I took my coat from the rack, still smelling of lavender. The steps to the door seemed to echo through the hallway, but no one tried to stop me. No one asked where I was going. It was as if my absence was less bothersome than my presence. I opened the door, feeling the cold wind cut my face. One last time I looked at that illuminated room. And then I closed the door. Brenda asked, "Is she really leaving just like that?" And Robert just said, "She'll come back. She always comes back." The room was small, with beige walls and a faint smell of mold. But it was mine. For the first time in decades, I was alone without the obligation to smile for anyone. Lying on the bed with rough sheets, I stared at the ceiling as if it could give me some answer. The memories came in waves. The births of my children, the birthday dinners, the days I cried hidden in the car. I didn't know yet what I would do. I only knew I wouldn't go back. My body seemed to weigh more than ever, and my mind struggled between fear and relief. The silence was deafening but also liberating. I wondered if Robert missed me. Probably not. I wondered if Logan thought of me. Maybe. But at that moment those questions didn't matter. I needed for the first time to think about myself. I turned on the old notebook I had carried since the times I helped Logan with school projects. The screen lit up, flickering. She opens the notebook and types, "Abandoned farms in Montana." The photos were cold, desolate, but strangely welcoming. I saw fields covered in snow, barns falling apart, broken fences. It was as if that external abandonment mirrored exactly what I felt inside. And yet, there was something there. Something raw, true, unfiltered. I clicked on a random ad just to see. But a spark lit up. For the first time in years, I felt the urge to dream. I thought, what if I started over far away from everything? Where no one knew me, where I wasn't just someone's wife. I went through an old folder of papers in my email, and to my surprise, found old statements from an account I had created before getting married. It was small but still active. I almost laughed alone, as if that young woman from decades ago had left me a hidden rescue note. I opened the statement with trembling fingers. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to take a bold step. Enough to buy a fresh start, even without knowing if I would have the courage. "With this, I can buy my freedom," I whispered. And that was exactly what I did. In less than 2 days, between calls and email exchanges with a patient real estate agent named Eleanor, I had closed the purchase. I didn't visit, didn't ask about the neighborhood or structure. I just said yes. It was irrational, impulsive, senseless. But it was also mine. For the first time in a long time, something was just mine. I signed the documents digitally, with hands that trembled but did not hesitate. Eleanor replied with a simple and direct confirmation email. Signature confirmed. "Welcome to Big Sky." I returned without warning. It was early, the sky still covered by clouds threatening rain. I parked in front of the house that for decades I called home, but which now seemed like a museum of old versions of myself. I entered with the keys I still had, and the smell was the same as always: brewed coffee, wax furniture, mistreated memories. I went up the stairs in silence, went to the office, and began to gather the papers I would need: identification, certificate, contracts. I didn't look at the picture frames. I didn't want to see my own ghost. While putting the last documents in my bag, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Ryan. He looked at me as if I were a stranger, a nuisance. He said no one knew I was coming and that all of that was unnecessary. I took a deep breath without answering. He crossed his arms with that same impatient tone as his father, and blurted out, "Don't make a scene, Mom." It hurt. Not because of the words but because of who said them. My son, the one I rocked with such care, now repeated the contempt his father taught him. I gave him no answer. I also took some old photos in my engagement ring, not out of attachment but out of justice. I wouldn't leave my memories in the hands of those who never saw me. The kitchen still held my recipe notebooks, and I took 2 of them with me. Small things, but things that had my name embroidered on them, literally or not. When I returned to the entrance hall, Ryan was still there, standing, waiting for me to say something. But I didn't owe explanations to anyone anymore. I stopped in front of the open door and looked back for the first time. Nothing there was mine anymore. Not even the roof that sheltered me for so many nights of loneliness. It was a house full of voices but without listening. And it was time to leave it as someone who finally understood that she deserves to be heard. Ryan stares at me and says, "Don't make a scene." Robert was on the back porch when I found him, sitting, drinking coffee as if the world hadn't changed since my departure. He looked at me with fake surprise, as if he wasn't sure I was really there. He started laughing even before I said anything. "You made your scene, Madison. Now you can come back. You're done with that tantrum, aren't you?" I stood tall, firm, with the folder in my hands. I didn't need to shout anymore. The silence of certainty was enough. I said with the calmest voice I ever had, "I came to ask for a divorce." He laughed loudly, mockingly. "You? At 66 years old? What are you going to live on? Memories?" I remained firm. My fingers didn't tremble. My eyes didn't flee. I took the papers from the folder and placed them on the table, in front of him. Not out of anger, but out of respect for the woman I decided to be from then on. It was the end of a cycle that was too long. It was the beginning of something entirely mine. Robert tried to be disdainful. He said I was going through some crisis, that I needed help, not distance. But his words no longer found an echo inside me. I was no longer the one who shrank at every acidic phrase. I was another. A woman who had woken up. A woman who no longer waited for validation to exist. He tried to take the papers, crumple them. But I didn't let him. I just pushed them back gently. Before leaving, I looked into his eyes and said everything I needed to. Without shouting, without begging. I said I wasn't going to ask for permission to live anymore. That I didn't owe one more day of my life to that marriage that reduced me. And that if he wanted to fight, let him fight with the absence he himself cultivated. I turned my back with lightness. She hands over the papers and says, I am not going to ask for permission. The car was waiting for me on the other side of the street, like a ship ready to set sail. I got in without rushing, with the folder on my lap and my heart beating steadily. As I started the engine, I looked in the rearview mirror. The house was there, imposing but empty of meaning. It was there that my voice had been silenced for years. Where I was treated as background, as a domestic utility, as a shadow. But now I was leaving with a name, with a choice, with truth. The streets of the neighborhood seemed smaller than I remembered. And I bigger. Inside, a courage was growing that wouldn't fit in that small world where I was shrunk for so long. There was no going back. Because there is no possible return to the place where one was denied. I took a deep breath, accelerated slowly, and left behind the woman I once was. Not with pain but with decision. Never again will I be mute where I should be sound. The white landscape stretched as far as the eyes could reach. The mountains in the background seemed like silent observers, and the open sky was an invitation to the unknown. When the plane landed and I got out of the rental car, a cutting wind hit my face, but it didn't scare me. There was something in that cold that woke me up, that pulled me back to life. Montana was not an obvious destination. It was a raw, difficult, liberating choice. Eleanor was waiting for me with a contained smile and a heavy coat. Welcome, she said, with that look of someone who evaluates without haste. The way to the farm was long, flanked by pine trees covered in snow. The car creaked on the climbs, and the silence between us was comfortable. She spoke little, but her eyes seemed to understand everything. When we stopped in front of the rusty gate, something in me quieted down. Sounds like a fresh start, said the real estate agent Eleanor. The first view of the farm took my breath away. Not because of the beauty, because there was no beauty there yet, but because of the raw potential. A sunken barn, a house with a slanted roof, broken windows and faded paint. It seemed to have been forgotten by the world. But I saw it differently. I saw what it could be. I saw shelter, healing, a fresh start. It was as if my own reflection was there, covered in ruin but pulsing with life. Eleanor watched me as I walked among the loose boards. I didn't expect you to give up upon seeing this, she commented. I smiled. Giving up was something I did when I still asked for permission to exist. Now, I would dig every foundation with my own hands if necessary. And it would be. The cold northern air cut my face but lit up my chest. Something beautiful is going to be born here. Night fell quickly, as it always does in winter. The electricity was precarious, and the walls still creaked with the wind. I prepared a corner with blankets and a flashlight, drinking tea from a chipped mug left by former owners. The silence of the house didn't scare me. It was a clean silence, different from the one I lived in for years, full of swallowed words. This silence listened to me. This silence welcomed me. I lay on the old mattress, my eyes fixed on the exposed beams of the ceiling. For a moment I was afraid. Not of the cold, not of the loneliness, but of not being enough. Of failing alone. But courage is a plant that grows in the fissure of fear, and I felt it sprout. Before sleeping, I wrote on a torn piece of paper, with a pen I found in the kitchen. I taped it to the door. She writes on a paper, Dawnlight Retreat grand opening in 1 year. The sound of hammers was like new music to my ears. The cold wind entered through the cracks, but inside the house there was movement, human warmth, a promise of change. Isabel Reed arrived early, with tools in hand and a steady gaze. She was the type of woman who didn't ask for permission. She occupied space with serene authority. She brought with her a small but efficient team. None of them treated me like a lost old lady. They looked at me as the owner of it all. On the first day I just watched. Then I began to help. Removing rotten boards, cleaning beams, noting measurements. My fingers went numb, my back ached, but I smiled as I hadn't smiled in a long time. Isabel showed me how to use an electric saw, how to calculate the pitch of a roof. Every hammer blow was like a word I could never say before. I, who was always a spectator, was now building with my own hands. And it was real. During a coffee break, we sat on the entrance stairs covered in dust. Isabel looked at me with that direct way of hers and spoke, "If you don't run away in the first month, you stay forever." I laughed, because I already knew I wasn't going to run away. Even with calluses on my hands and knees throbbing, there was meaning there. It was different from any luxury I had ever experienced. There was authenticity in every scratch, in every piece of repurposed wood. It was a fresh start that hurt and healed at the same time. When I went to sleep that night, exhausted and covered in dust, I looked at my dirty hands and smiled. Every crack in the skin was an open crack in the past. And through there, finally, something new was entering. Isabel says, "If you don't run away in the first month, you stay forever." The following days were harder than I imagined. We discovered corroded plumbing, poorly installed wiring, and compromised foundations. Each new problem required a quick solution, and more money than I had calculated. But we always found a way. At every stumble, unexpected support appeared. Isabel didn't complain. She just worked, took a deep breath, adjusted the plans. I learned from her that strength doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it just keeps going. And then came the blizzard. 3 days of complete isolation, without electricity and with the road blocked. The cold was cutting, supplies were limited, and work had to stop. We spent the nights wrapped in blankets, drinking soup heated in the improvised fireplace. We talked about everything, from treated wood to the pieces that life breaks in us. Even in the dark, there was more light in that house than there had been for years in my old one. The team stayed in the parts that were already habitable. The windows were sealed with plastic and boards, but even so the wind got in. I worried about every detail, from insulation to their safety. I didn't want anyone to get hurt trying to help me start over. Even so, no one walked away. On the contrary, I realized that a strange alliance had been born there. As if everyone felt that this wasn't just a renovation. It was a reconstruction of the soul. When the sun returned and the snow began to melt, we resumed work as if nothing had happened. But I knew something had changed. Inside and out. We were no longer just a work crew, we were survivors of a winter that tested us together. The wood creaked differently now. The walls gained color and history. A blizzard interrupts everything for 3 days. One day I woke up with a scratchy throat, a mild fever, and a weight in my chest. Isabel noticed instantly. She ordered me to rest, to stop for a few days. But I refused. The body was tired, but the spirit was alive. For the first time in decades, I felt purposeful. The illness was just a reminder that I was human but not broken. Even between coughs and aches, I kept helping, supervising, making tea for the others. Isabel looked at me with that mix of irritation and respect. She knew arguing was no use. I wouldn't retreat. Not anymore. I had already spent years asleep. I wouldn't lose my own days of awakening now. My feet hurt, but my steps had direction. My body asked for rest, but my soul wanted haste. It was as if every day there was a new brick in the foundation of a new woman. On the lunch break, I sat next to Isabel near the improvised bonfire in the shed. She offered me a blanket, and I accepted, but I remained there, firm. I looked around and saw what we were creating. The house, the barn, the future. It was more than wood and cement. It was a space of welcoming. A shelter for anyone who, like me, had forgotten what it was like to feel alive. Isabel finally nodded. And there, without needing to say it, I felt validated. When night fell, I took a hot bath and looked at myself in the cracked mirror of the improvised bathroom. I saw dark circles, I saw tiredness, but I also saw something I hadn't recognized for years, a shine in the eyes. That was it. I was coming back to myself, to a version I never knew but that always existed. She says to Isabel, standing still was always more painful. The sun was rising between the trees when Isabel entered the shed with 2 cups of coffee. We sat on the entrance step, as was already routine, with hands warmed by the mugs. She looked at me, serious, and said, "I didn't tell you before, But I also ran away from a marriage. He silenced me with a look. We remained in silence. Not out of discomfort but out of respect. She didn't need to say more. I understood. It was at that instant that I realized she wasn't here just for the work. She was here because she knew what it was to rebuild something on top of one's own rubble. Because she had already done it. Her fortress now made more sense. It was built on top of a lot of pain. I felt the urge to cry but I held back. It was the type of sharing that asks for listening, not tears. Shared pain creates an invisible bridge between two women. We stayed there for more than an hour. We talked about everything but without haste. We recounted wounds, laughed at absurdities of the past, and she even showed me a tattoo she got after the divorce, a bird leaving a cage. That was what we were doing here, freeing wings. When she stood up, she touched me on the shoulder and said, "Maybe that's why I believed in you." And that kept echoing inside me all day. Maybe that's why I believed in you. That afternoon, I sat alone in the newly renovated room and observed the walls. White, smooth but not empty. Stories fit there. Mine. The ones that would come. I realized that this project wasn't just about rebuilding a house. It was about erecting a space where pain could turn into hope, where other women could find shelter, firm ground, and perhaps even their own voice. I was building a house, yes, but I was also rebuilding myself on the inside. For the first time, I understood the dimension of what I was doing, and it was bigger than me. The wood we placed didn't just support a roof, it supported fresh starts. With every window installed, a new view opened up. With every leveled floor, a past aligned with the present. It was as if the screws I tightened on the outside were correcting internal cracks. This place is going to heal people. It's going to heal me. The pace of the work slowed down when the main rooms were ready. Now it was time for details, painting, decoration, final adjustments. And, along with that, a new type of anxiety began to visit me. What if no one came? What if all this was just a dream too beautiful to be true? I looked at the ready rooms and imagined empty beds. I was afraid. Because until then my project only existed for me. And now it needed to open up to the world. Isabel told me it was natural. That the butterflies in the stomach were the warning that we were about to fly. But I still doubted. I still felt the insecurity of someone who spent a lifetime silent. Would anyone trust me? Would women come all the way here, so far seeking shelter in something born from my pain? I sat on the porch looking at the horizon, seeking answers in the pale Montana sky. Will anyone come? The car parked slowly in front of the house, and my heart beat faster. Amber got out with a shabby coat and empty eyes, as if she were dragging herself inside. There was no emotion on her face, just exhaustion. She looked like someone who expected nothing more from the world, or from herself. She walked in silence to the door, without even looking around. I greeted her with a gentle smile and a mug of hot tea. She just nodded, took the drink and went to the indicated room. No questions, no thanks. Just dragging steps and a sigh upon closing the door. I wasn't offended. I had already been in that same place, where silence is more comfortable than any word. Her pain was mute but screamed between the lines of every gesture. That night I heard the creaking of the floor as she walked through the house. Sometimes she stopped in front of the fireplace, other times she went back to the room. She ate little, spoke even less. But she sat at the table and that was already a start. I stayed nearby but didn't intrude. I waited. Time there had another rhythm. And healing, I knew, begins when no one rushes us. Amber finally broke the silence. I didn't come to talk. I came not to disappear. In that sentence she handed over everything: desperation, a cry for help, fear of disappearing from herself. I understood. Because I also had the urge to disappear without leaving a note. I felt the urge to hold her, but I respected the distance. The simple fact of her being there was a victory she didn't even realize. And it was just the beginning. I didn't come to talk. I came not to disappear. The next day I left breakfast ready with a note: whenever you want, I'll be on the porch. Amber appeared at noon with swollen eyes and hesitant steps. She sat next to me and we stayed in silence for a long time. I asked nothing. I just offered more tea and shared the view. The wind touched our faces, and that cold air seemed to cleanse the soul. She finally spoke: here. It seems like I can breathe slowly. I replied calmly: this place is yours as much as it is mine. And you don't need to tell anything. Just existing here is enough. She nodded with tears almost flowing. I noticed the effort she made to keep herself firm. I didn't pressure her. The retreat wasn't a place of demands. It was a refuge for ruins that still want to bloom. Gradually, she began to allow herself to exist again. I don't have answers, but I have a place. Amber passed the following days in silence but present. She walked around the surroundings, sometimes sat near the fireplace and read in silence. One afternoon she called me to the porch. Her voice was low, almost a breeze. I haven't cried in years. But tonight I dreamed of my childhood. And I cried in my sleep. I sat next to her saying nothing. She then rested her head on my shoulder, and the tears came. Hot, heavy, necessary. It was a long cry made of accumulation. When she finally calmed down, I hugged her slowly. We were there, two women who survived worlds that tried to silence us. In that hug there was no pity, there was recognition. Of one who knows the weight of her own pain and of liberation. Amber fell asleep in peace that night, and I for the first time felt that all of that made sense. Amber records a video thanking me, and it goes viral. The news came like a punch. Robert had found out about the retreat. It wasn't enough to have lost me. Now he wanted to delegitimize what I was building. I received the official notification with cold hands. He was judicially requesting my interdiction, alleging emotional instability and delusional behavior. He said I was putting other women at risk, all because he couldn't stand my freedom. I stayed in silence for a few minutes, sitting with the open envelope on my lap. Tears came, but from anger, not sadness. That was how the world acted with women who dared to stand up. When they can't control us, they try to invalidate us. I took a deep breath and called Isabel. She came right away, read the papers, and with her usual calm said, "We will solve this. Together." And at that instant I decided not to run. She is not right in the head, he states in a legal petition. The next day I went to town and hired a lawyer. Clara Martinez, a firm woman, specialized in family cases. I explained everything, from the Thanksgiving dinner to the opening of the retreat. She listened without interrupting, just taking notes and nodding. In the end, she looked into my eyes and said, "You have more than a case. You have a story, and we are going to use it." I left there feeling the ground firm under my feet. I gathered receipts, photos, invoices, testimonies from those who passed through the retreat. Amber wrote a moving letter. The construction team provided payment records. I assembled a detailed dossier with everything I did and built. I knew this wasn't just a legal process. It was a battle for the right to be. When I finished organizing the documents, I looked at myself in the mirror and murmured, "I am not crazy. I am free." Isabel went further. She organized a small gathering at the village community house. She invited women who knew us, neighbors who passed by there, even the owner of the general store who saw the construction from scratch. All agreed to testify in my favor. Not as an obligation but as recognition. It was more than support, it was sisterhood. I, who for so long was invisible, was now surrounded by witnesses of my living existence. On the night before the hearing, we were gathered around the fireplace. Someone brought cake, another brought mulled wine. We laughed, we cried, we toasted. For the first time I felt I belonged to a tribe, to a lineage of women who, even wounded, did not stop walking. When I went to bed I knew that, whatever happened, I had already won. Because I existed. Because I resisted. She is not only capable, she is essential. The story came out suddenly without warning. A local reporter saw Amber's video and decided to investigate. In a few days we were on news portals, social media, blogs. The headline was direct. 66-year-old woman transforms abandoned farm into refuge for women in crisis. The photos showed the simple environments, the discreet smiles, the lit fireplace. My name for the first time was at the center of something inspiring. Isabel called me to see the story on the computer. The screen trembled under my fingers. The reporter's words said that I was a symbol of resilience, of late reinvention, that there was courage in what I did. I read in silence, absorbing every sentence like a bomb. After being diminished so much, there I was, recognized, celebrated. Who is Madison Clark, the woman who built everything alone? The next day, emails began to arrive. One, two, then dozens. Women of different ages, states, stories. Some recounted abuses, others just said they were tired. All asked for the same thing, a place. A space to breathe, to fall and get up without judgment. I read every message like someone receiving letters from castaways thrown into the sea, waiting for rescue. I understood every line. I had been there. I couldn't hold back the tears when reading an email from a 72-year-old lady. I don't want luxury. I want a place where my pain fits. That was it. It wasn't about new beds or beautiful scenery. It was about belonging. About being seen and validated. Amber hugged me when she saw me crying. "You did this, Madison," she said. And at that moment I realized pain had turned into a bridge. I don't want luxury. I want a place where my pain fits. Sitting on the porch, I spent the afternoon reading the requests. I couldn't accept everyone immediately, but I replied one by one. Some with dates for future stays, others just with welcoming words. In every line I read a version of myself, women tired of being silent, looking for a chance to start over. And there, on that simple computer, something bigger than the retreat was born, a living network of hope. Isabel printed some of the messages and glued them to the bulletin board in the common room. "May courage never be lacking for those who step here," she wrote. The village women began to help with donations, supplies, even clothes. The retreat grew not only in structure but in soul. I looked at myself in the mirror and for the first time in a long time I didn't see a shadow. I saw someone whole. Someone real. Maybe I was never invisible. I arrived at the courthouse in Helena with cold hands and a steady heart. Clara was by my side, carrying the folder with all the evidence. The hall was large, cold, and seemed to swallow me. On the other side, Robert looked at me with that same contempt he always used to silence me. But now something was different. I was no longer the woman from the Thanksgiving dinner. He stood up to speak. His voice calm, trained, manipulative. He said I was unstable, that I had abandoned the family, that now I commanded a space without supervision. He tried to paint my freedom as madness. He repeated that I was dependent, confused, lost. He looked at me like someone expecting me to crumble. But I didn't tremble. Because I had fallen before and gotten up. She cannot manage anything. She has always been dependent. When it was my turn, I stood up with the folder in my hands. I walked to the center of the room and handed the judge an organized dossier with every detail of my journey. Purchase contracts, renovation receipts, donation records, thank you emails. Testimonies from Amber, Isabel, Clara. I showed that the retreat was real. That my capacity was there, documented. Not just on paper but in living history. I looked at Robert without hatred. I said, "For years I was the invisible structure of our home. I cooked, I cared, I stayed silent. Now I have built something with my name, my strength, my truth." The judge read everything in silence. At the end he sighed, took off his glasses and declared, "I do not see an incapable woman here. I see a courageous woman." Dependent? I supported everyone in silence. The decision was clear. The request for interdiction was archived. The judge even added that I was an example of reconstruction and overcoming. I didn't know if I should laugh or cry. I just took a deep breath, feeling an immense weight lift off my shoulders. Clara hugged me. Isabel was also there, smiling discreetly in the background. Robert stood up, humiliated, and left before the session even ended. I left the courthouse with nothing in my hands. No paper, no material victory. But something in me was complete. For the first time my story had been heard and recognized. The erased woman now had a voice. The silenced wife was now a name, was action, was a symbol. And all this without shouting. Just existing. Just being. She leaves the courthouse with her head held high and her hands empty, but her heart full. I walk slowly among the retreat cabins now all occupied. There are low voices, contained laughter, clothes on the line, books forgotten on the porches. The wood creaks under my feet, as if welcoming every step with memory. The trees around are in bloom, and the wind brings a light scent of freedom. Every detail reminds me that this place was born of pain, but bloomed in love. I pass a cabin where Amber is teaching painting to a new guest. In another, 2 women tend the community garden we planted together. There is no oppressive silence here anymore, only necessary pauses. There is no more fear of existing. What was once ruin turned into shelter, and what was once just escape turned into home. I go up to the hill where we built a simple lookout but with a view that embraces everything. From up high I can see every building, every lit window. I imagine the stories that now live there. Stories under reconstruction like mine. The sunset pours a golden hue over the roof of the main house. And I just breathe in peace. Every lit window holds a story under reconstruction. Amid the week's mail, a letter caught my attention. I recognized the handwriting even before opening it. Brenda, eldest daughter. Cold, critical. She said she saw my story in a news piece and wanted to understand what you have become. The words were formal but carried weight. I read and reread, not knowing what to feel. Was it regret? Curiosity? Or just wounded pride? I kept the letter in the desk drawer. I didn't reply. Not yet. Maybe one day. Maybe never. Some answers deserve to mature in the right time. Today I don't feel urgency. Because, for the first time, I am not the one chasing validation. I am enough for myself. And that is already answer enough. She smiles but doesn't answer yet. I decided to paint the entrance again. The wood was worn by the wind and the seasons but still firm. I chose a new paint, the color of hope. I took the brush and wrote with steady hands and a whole soul. Letter by letter, I left my mark not only on the sign but in time. Because what we created here is bigger than me. It is a legacy. It is a seed for others. The sign now reads, "Here, starting over is the rule, not the exception." I sat on the stone bench next to it, observing who arrived and who left. Some with heavy suitcases, others only with tears in their eyes. But all, without exception, carrying inside themselves a question. Is there still time for me? And the answer in that place will always be yes. And for the first time she feels she belongs to herself. Now I am curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you gone through something similar? Support the channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I am leaving on the end screen another story that you will also like, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. Until the next video.